Johnny Tremain, A Story of Boston in Revolt by Esther Forbes. We're on Chapter 4, Part 4. Oddly enough, Johnny slept on his straw pallet in the jail. The night before, lying and weeping among the graves of Copp's Hill, he had reached bottom. He could not go lower than that. No matter what happened, he could not help but now go up. He knew Isana's childish squeals were nothing compared to the serious charge Mr. Light had brought against him. But the squeals had just about broken his heart. The accusation of burglary he could take. He felt tough enough and hard enough to take anything. But he could not help but think of the gallows just beyond the town gates, how they had loomed up at him through the dark of the night like a warning. Before he had finished his breakfast of corn gruel, Rob arrived. Johnny had known he would come. He brought blankets, books, food. Seemingly by the nonchalance of his manner, nothing was more unusual than to find one's friend in jail. About his muscular brown throat, Johnny could see a medal hung upon a string. On it was engraved a Tree of Liberty. So Rab was one of the semi-secret famous Sons of Liberty, those carefully organized mobs who often took justice into their own hands. They frightened royal officers out of Boston, stopped British admirals from impressing Yankee seamen as they were impressed in England. They could at will paralyze trade, courts, governments. Many a night Johnny had heard their whistlings, conch shells, and cries of town-born turn out, the running of their feet. And next day they had seen the effigies they had hung, the Tory fences they had torn down or windows broken, and heard that Royal Commissioner so-and-so had been frightened out of Boston. Or such and such merchant had wept when hailed before the Liberty Tree, and sworn never to do trade with England until all grievances had been righted. The Laphams had hated such lawless seizure of government by the Sons of Liberty. Johnny had not thought much about it. Seeing the medal at Rab's throat made him think it might be fun to be out with him. The medal did its work, for both the turnkey and the jailer were also sons. Johnny was given a neat private room in the ground floor. Such rooms were usually reserved for gentlemen jailed for debt. Here he told Rab his entire story. Rab had already found out that the case would come up on the following Tuesday before Mr. Justice Dana. If Mr. Justice thought there was not sufficient evidence to hold him for higher court and a jury trial, he would immediately release him. Then he asked if Johnny had shown his cup to any living soul sometime before August 23rd. Such a witness would prove that Johnny had owned a cup before Mr. Lights had been stolen. Why, of course, Scylla Lapham. That was July. Come to think of it, the very day Mr. Hancock ordered a sugar basin. It was the 2nd day of July. That was a Tuesday. That's all you'll need. Mr. Light was a fool to bring so flimsy a charge against you. What do you suppose he meant when he said he had expected something like me turning up as soon as that cup was stolen? I don't know what goes on in that clever bad head, but perhaps he thinks you are an impostor and stole the cup first to back up some claim of kinship. Of course, Scylla will come to court for you. She will, if her mother will let her. Would Miss Lapham give you a good character? No. She thinks these days I'm bad enough to steal a wig off a parson's head. Next day, Rab was back at the same time. He was a little perturbed. Mr. Light himself had been to Lapham's in the ruby coach and ordered a dozen silver spoons, a tea caddy, and if all went well, would order a silver tankard, a foot high. A bribe? Scylla says he paid in advance. Then it was Mrs. Lapham said she would not have her girl mixed up in such a disgraceful case. She promised Scylla would spend next Tuesday, under lock and key. I could hang first. And she is determined to please that Mr. Tweedy, too. If he won't sign that contract and get right to work, she can't get him Mr. Light's get Mr. Light's silver made. Poor old Mr. Latham won't do anything but read his Bible. Says he hasn't long to prepare to meet his Maker. By the way, Mr. Tweedy just about hates you. Says you called him a squeaky pig. He didn't like it. Of course I called him a squeak pig. Don't see why he cares. Well, you go around calling people squeak pigs, and you've just about got to take it when they hit back. Not with their tongues. Mostly they're not quick enough. But like this. Tweety saw his chance to get back at you. He says if Miss Latham's let Scylla testify for you, he'll take a ship back to Baltimore. Says he's sensitive and a great artist, and he can't be upset by thieves and brawlers. You never mind, but I don't see the point of going around. Oh, forget that squeak pig, for heaven's sakes. Johnny was sulky. Now for a lawyer. I've talked to Josiah Quincy. He often writes for the Observer. He says if you want him, he's ready. Josiah Quincy? But, Rab, you tell him not to. You don't want him? He's the best young lawyer in Boston. I could never pay him. You don't understand. He'll give you his time for nothing. He's coming to see you this afternoon, and I'm meeting Scylla. I'm meeting Scylla, sort of behind her mother's back, to make plans. It all depends on Scylla, doesn't it? Well, pretty much. And Miss Latham and the Tweety, says they'll lock her up. Lock her up so I can't get her out. Lock her up so I can't get her out? Boy, I could get her out of this jail. Get her out of this Tower of London. And that girl would testify for you, even if it cost her life. What's her real name? Priscilla. Well, may Priscilla be on my side if ever I'm accused of anything. What about the little girl? Is she really as bright as she looks? No, I don't think so. She's just sort of a parrot. She's always going around repeating what Scylla or anyone else says to her, as if she had thought it up all herself. The end of chapter 4, part 4.